What's up, Jets fans? Welcome to the latest edition of Jets Latest, where you get the latest on the Jets, Jets. I'm your host, the spitting statistician Dane Martinez, and today I want to look at the wide receiver market in free agency. Everybody's talking about how wide receiver, specifically a wide receiver 2, is a position of need for the Jets. Obviously, another weapon potentially opposite Garrett Wilson. We have tried, right? They drafted Arian Smith last year. We acquired via trade guys like Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie, but many people still believe that wide receiver 2 is a glaring need for this team. So now that we are in the offseason, I've talked a little bit about the draft and what I think. I do think that the Jets are going to spend number 16 overall with a wide receiver. And I actually would like to target Lemon out of USC. That's where I think they're going. But the free agency route does happen before the draft when the new league year starts in March. And I want to give you kind of the broad strokes on what's out there. And by the way, from now until March, you got to keep it locked with Jets Latest, okay? Tell a Jets fan friend to tell a Jets fan friend. Thank you to the almost 2,700 of you who have subscribed. Click on that join button, and if you want to become a Jets Latest insider, click on the button and you can get exclusive content, all sorts of other perks as we continue with what is hopefully the Glennaissance. But let's look at the wide receiver free agency market, and I want to start at the top of the market. There are two wide receivers that I think are going to command over $20 million a year that are going to be the bells of the ball. And the first is George Pickens. George Pickens had a really good year with the Dallas Cowboys this year. 93 catches, 1,429 yards. That was actually the third most in the NFL, and 9 tutties. He had 137 targets. I actually think Dallas is going to try to find a way to bring him back. They like that combination of Pickens and Lamb for Dak Prescott. They're obviously an offensive team. The problem is he's going to command, 25, $30 million. The other name that's really interesting to me is Alec Pierce with the Indianapolis Colts. Only 47 catches, but for over 1,000 yards, okay? He's 21 yards per reception. That is the best in the NFL. His ADOT, and if you don't know about that stat, ADOT stands for average depth of target. Okay, and his ADOT of 19 yards was the highest in the NFL. That means he is pretty much one of the biggest downfield deep shot receivers in the NFL. And while I think he would be nice, here's the thing. There is no way on God's green earth, in my opinion, that the Jets are going to spend some of their cap space, and they do have cap space. They have like the 4th or 5th most cap space, but I don't think they're going to splurge financially in the free agent market on one of these wide receivers. Remember, Garrett Wilson signed a 4-year, $130 million deal last offseason. There's no way after Garrett Wilson is at $30+ million a year that they're going to invest 20, 25, $30 million a year on another wide receiver. It's just not going to happen. This is not the Cincinnati Bengals with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So I don't think that Pickens or Pierce, while are going to command a ton of money and are probably the top of the free agent market, are targets for the Jets. I think the Jets are going to go about it a different way. Then you say, what about some veterans? Like last year, we went the veteran route, right? Guys like Josh Reynolds, guys like Alan Lazard, and others. And I look at some of the veterans out there, and quite frankly, I don't think any of them are fits either. There are some experienced veterans out there. However, if you've kind of become a name brand wide receiver, I don't think they're going to want to join this Jets offense. If you're a guy like a Deebo Samuel, a Keenan Allen, a Hollywood Brown, a Mike Evans, who are going to be free agents, right? You want to either be the number one guy somewhere, and you're not going to be with Garrett Wilson here, or you're going to want to look for a quote-unquote contender, and most free agent wide receivers would not view that right now. Or you want to play with a damn good quarterback. And with the questions at quarterback for the Jets, I don't think these guys are going to want the Jets, right? I don't think the Jets, maybe they would want them, but I don't think these guys are going to be looking to be the number 2 wide receiver for this Jets offense, at least in 2026. Guys like Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, Jawan Jennings, Hollywood Brown, a Romeo Dubs. This is that kind of level of free agent that are out there that are veterans. I think most of these guys are going to return to their team. Guys like Jawan Jennings, I think, returns to the 49ers. Guys like a Romeo Dubs returns to the Packers. And those are better situations in terms of the quarterback, in terms of the contending nature of those teams, right? So that's not necessarily where I think they go either. And then you can say, What about bargain basement kind of guys? What about maybe older veterans or guys who were less productive that could be had? Kind of like Josh Reynolds, we thought was going to be this year before he got hurt. Or an Alan Lazard who laid an egg with us and wasn't really utilized. There are some guys like that, but quite frankly, I don't know if that tier of guy are actually upgrades over Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie, quite frankly. I'm talking about guys like Sterling Shepard. Look, Sterling Shepard had 370 yards receiving. Tyler Lockett, 291 yards receiving. A guy like Juju, 345 yards receiving, right? And the obvious thing here really is, are they really better than Adonai Mitchell? A.D. Mitchell had 453 yards receiving, right? That's more than some of these guys I'm naming. John Mechie, 33 catches, similar to what I'm talking about, like a Juju Smith-Schuster or a Tyler Lockett. And the thing is, remember, we targeted A.D. Mitchell. We targeted John Mechie for a couple of reasons. One, we've already expended, draft picks in order to acquire these guys. They've been in the building, so guys like AG and Muji have identified them as one of us. That's a big saying that Aaron Glenn says all the time. And quite frankly, those guys are 25 years old or younger. Why would I take a Tyler Lockett over 30? Why would I take some of these other guys who are on the back end for that quote-unquote veteran presence when I've got guys that could do the same level of production and are in their mid-20s? So I don't think these guys actually represent an upgrade from what we have right now. I think some of those guys who would represent an upgrade, a Keenan Allen, a Juwan Jennings, I don't think they would want New York, and I don't think we're going to spend the money on the position of wide receiver for a true stud like a Pickens or like a Alec Pierce even, who's kind of on the ascent, still young, and is that true deep target. I would say this, Arian Smith didn't really work out. Remember the draft pick out of Georgia, but we found someone else who did in Isaiah Williams. And the idea of Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie, and we saw them in the second half of the season, but remember, we also saw them with Brady Cook throwing them the ball. And they did flash at times. I don't think Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie can be number one wide receivers, but remember, Garrett Wilson was down and out. I think Garrett Wilson is your stud alpha number one. Here's what I think the wideout room looks like. Your number one wide receiver is Pro Bowl caliber, true stud, $30+ million a year, Garrett Wilson. Your number two wide receiver for 2026 is going to be number 16 overall, first round caliber draft pick wide receiver. I think Makai Lemon out of USC would be a perfect fit. My hope is that he is available. There are some others. You're going to hear these names, Concepcion. You're going to hear the name Tyson out there. I think Makai Lemon is the guy and could be a pick. So, Garrett Wilson, Makai Lemon. Then, and this is the part where some of you may disagree with me, then I think Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie are your number 3 and 4 wide receivers. And quite frankly, I think that's better than Alan Lazard and Tyler Johnson and Josh Reynolds and what we were going at, because they have that upside. We've seen them splash, and they're only 24, 25 years old. And then fifth, listen, team MVP Isaiah Williams is our number 5 wide receiver. And quite frankly, for a run-first offense, assuming that your first-round wide receiver performs well and isn't a complete bust, Garrett Wilson, let's call it Lemon, let's call it A.D. Mitchell, John Mechie, Isaiah Williams. That's what I think the wide receiver room is. I don't think we are addressing wide receiver 2 via free agency this year. I think we are addressing it with our number 16 overall pick, and then I think we're getting another year, quite frankly, of Mitchell and Mechie to be our number 3 and 4 wide receiver. And quite frankly, I think they can, in fact, do that. So that'll do it for this episode of Jets Latest. Remember, I always thank everybody contributing to the growth of this channel. Watch these videos, like these videos, engage in the comments, and tell a Jets fan friend to tell a Jets fan friend. So let's see what some of you Jets Latest regulars have to say. Mizzo9 says, so the Jets passing game states that the measure that all defenses are trying to achieve. That was a great way to build up Durante. Previously, I talked about the DC potential candidate from Minnesota and how the Minnesota Vikings pass defense was holding opponents to numbers that totaled the Jets passing offense. Sounds pretty good to me, right? Peter McHugh says, now that Moore is off the board, number 2 is open to bidders. I like getting 2 big defensive linemen with 2 picks, say Bain and Falk, Woods or Kennedy, wide receiver and safety in the second round. I actually think the wide receiver is going to be that second first round pick, as we just talked about. I've talked about Ruben Bain, who could be it. I believe a guy like Reese in the front seven, although at the linebacker level, could be it. Woods is, I believe, the stud interior guy out of Clemson. I do think, though, that Juwan Briggs and Harrison Phillips have been fine on the inside. I think it's edge or linebacker, but I don't disagree with Peter McHugh. And remember, I profiled some of the Oregon Ducks in a recent episode of Jets Latest that I think could be had. I would just flip flop it. I think number 2 is front 7 for sure. I think number 16, though, is wide receiver. And then I think they could go back in that second round, 33, 44, going back. And I mentioned guys like Amari Washington and others who could be that. Old Dave 1000 says, AG preached aggressiveness play from day one. Wilkes never brought that. This DC is a very big decision for Glenn. We will keep it locked and monitor that DC because I do believe that's important. I do believe aggressiveness is going to be more of a calling card. I do believe it's going to be a younger guy, a guy that could be more personable with the players because I believe Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald, Jamian Sherwood, Quincy Williams, Brandon Stevens, A.Z. Thomas, Brownlee, Briggs, Phillips, Malachi Moore. I believe we have some talent. We're going to bring in some more, and let's see if we can put it all together in another year. But like I said, that'll do it for this episode of Jets Latest. If you want to hear more from me, the spitting statistician Dane Martinez. If you don't know, now you know, but Jets Latest regulars know the drill. I am the host of the FTN Fantasy Show over on Sirius XM. And the host of In Game Live, a betting show on Sports Grid. I'm always here to help you win your league and win that cash. We'll continue to look at the landscape out there in free agency, the draft, our coaching changes, and what the Jets are saying now that we are in the offseason for the green and white. Tell a Jets fan friend to tell a Jets fan friend. But for this episode of Jets Latest, we out of here. Peace.